Just decide to make an upgrade. Welcome back to another episode of the Upgrade My Classroom podcast. My name is Kevin McKellar, the host, and this is the show where we teach proactive mental health and personal development strategies for teens so teachers and education professionals can come, listen, learn, and go upgrade their classroom so they can teach better decision-making frameworks, better social and emotional learning frameworks, better behavioral frameworks, and everything and anything in between. And today, I have a fantastic guest on. He is Mr. Dan Wendelken. He is an elementary band director here in Long Island, New York, and he is also a very good friend of mine. And he's also been a part of many different entrepreneurial things that I've done in the past in some regard, and really happy to have him on. I'm really happy to just have a really wide-ranging conversation on his experience and both teaching and performing and just being a great human being. We cover a couple of things. We do start talking about a little bit the differences between the emotional displays that an elementary student will show and what a high school student might hide. So a lot of times it's a little bit easier to kind of see what's happening in the child of in the mind of a 4th and 5th grader versus an 11th and 12th grader. They've learned to hide it pretty well. So we've talked about some of the nuances there, how we approach that, some of the interventions that we do when it comes to keeping things as positive as possible for students that are falling behind. And then we also primarily talk about the issues when it comes to either a junior or a senior, even a sophomore, as they begin to transition and start thinking about what they're going to do after high school. And primarily, if they are going to go to college, how do they prepare for college, both tactically and emotionally? Because the fact that when you are making these huge decisions in your life that oftentimes are not only cost a lot of time, but cost a tremendous amount of money, there's a lot of stress with that. So what do we do when it comes to our extracurricular activities? What actually guides us? And his examples are specifically when it comes to music. If someone is going to be a performer or a teacher for that matter, whatever it may be, is it better for them to be the most well-rounded student with a bunch of AP courses? Or is it better specifically to take more music classes, more private lessons with different teachers, have more time to practice their instrument to become the best performer? And this is a really interesting debate that Dan and I have. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Mr. Dan Wendelken.
Mr. Dan Wendelken, welcome to the show. How are you, good sir?
I'm fantastic. I'm on break. Couldn't be better.
Listen, you look like a teacher who's had a few days off, so you've got a glow about you, my friend. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. This is very exciting because Mr. Wendelken has been part of my entrepreneurial endeavors since day one. In some facet. OG here. And he has been in front of the camera, behind the camera, behind the scenes, and I'm just not letting him go. He's going to be hanging around some time, and I even have some more projects I think that I want to get him involved in. So if you like this episode today, you have to leave us a comment and say, yes, keep more of Mr. Dan the Pan. And on that note, I'll give you about...
nickname, right?
Yeah, of course. With that, let's give you the floor. Tell us, for the second time now, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what you teach, and what you're all about.
Sure. My name is Dan Wendelken. I've been teaching in school systems for about 7 years. I've taught elementary, middle, high school, college students. Right now, I'm also doing a lot of performing. I play in a wind symphony. I play in a funk band. I play in a wedding band. So between the teaching and the performing, I'm a pretty busy dude. So
I'd say so. What do you play?
In all of these groups, I play the trumpet.
So would somebody ever call you for a professional gig to play the clarinet?
No, I could do like my middle school or high school's musical, like maybe like a not insane part on a clarinet. I actually like the clarinet. I'm actually pretty good at clarinet for our trumpet player, but I would never want to take your money while I'm playing the clarinet. That wouldn't be fair.
Yeah, and I say that because a lot of people, when they hear about music teachers, the first thing they say, they're like, "Oh, you could play every instrument," and we say, "Sure, yeah, I can play hot cross buns on every instrument."
I always say, I try to stay one step ahead of the kids. So right now I teach elementary, so it's pretty easy to stay ahead of them. But when I was teaching a lot of high school, it was definitely more of a challenge to like be able to demonstrate on those other instruments.
Did you find that when you started teaching high school that you quickly became, well, let me ask you this, which grade level do you think you became better at your secondary instruments as a result of?
1,000% middle school, because it required the playing the most. I feel like when I got to high school, I didn't do as much like modeling on other instruments. I just didn't what I had to do didn't necessarily call for that. But when I was in middle school, like I had all my horns out, and I would every lesson, 6th through 8th grade, like be able to play whatever they're playing. And then and then also when it came to like learning their repertoire, that became a pretty good way for me to really enhance those skills.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I found that for me, like elementary, I guess I taught more elementary throughout my time teaching, and I just feel like elementary is a great place to, because you needed to at least have some secondary chops to get them started, which you're pretty much prepared to teach elementary kids after you get out of college. I mean, on your secondary instruments, even if you take, limited secondary courses, but still you have, when you have the flute in your hand, when you have the oboe in your hand, oh, not oboe, but you just, all of a sudden you find yourself, fiddling around with it after the kids leave or before the kids leave. And that just a little bit of extra practicing, it's like, I was way better than I am in college. But yeah, it's all different because again, in high school, you might have a high school program of ninth graders that, you might inherit maybe not such a great program, and ninth graders coming in, like you still have to do a tremendous amount of modeling and playing. But again, this is where, we're going off on already, it's 3 minutes and we're off on a huge tangent. So let's
right for us.
Let's dive a little bit, take this tangent and go a little bit more focused in your time and your differences. Let's just talk about general differences from, say, elementary to middle school and then middle school to high school, and some of the things that you've seen that are just different in general. I mean, there's going to be teachers who are listening to this who are, pre-teacher, and they're in college, they're getting their education degree, and they're kind of curious about what this really is like, at least from a social perspective and a perspective of social awareness and just general growth. What are some of these differences?
Sure. For me, the biggest thing I learned about elementary in terms of there's the students' like social emotional like well-being while they're learning an instrument is I feel like they're much more obviously much more emotional as younger students, and they get frustrated a lot easier if they're not able to do something, or the person next to them is doing it and they're not. So that's one of those things that I've noticed, and I feel like you really have to be armed with verbiage and like really good vocabulary to be able to talk to the students about like, and it's okay that you're not getting this as quick as the person next to you, because you've only been around the track one time, and by the time you're done playing your instrument when you're a high school senior, which is our goal as elementary teachers, you're going to have been around the track a lot of times. So right now someone might be ahead of you a little bit, but it's not a race. So you're just trying to really make sure that every session that I teach with the students, and I had that difference, one student might be above another, and trying to really just keep encouraging. Because what I've seen is uh, students will, if maybe it's a this day and age thing, but if they don't pick up an instrument and it's not easy for them right away, then it quickly turns to then that's when they don't practice at home, and then they never get any better, and then they get more frustrated, and then they wind up either just not ever really caring about it, or they want to quit. And I feel like, I guess you can probably apply that to all the age groups that I've taught, at least. But I've definitely seen that more in the elementary students who really just like, if they don't get it right away, they lose interest really quick. That is definitely the struggle and the battle that I'm always trying to navigate every day.
I completely agree. I completely agree. There was this pressure, and I remember the first month of lessons. You ever get a fourth grade group of, I would say, clarinet players, right? You get a fourth grade group of clarinet players in, and that first month, everybody's pretty much in the same playing field. They're barely making sounds. They've really just kind of still figuring out how to put it together, what a reed is, and all these things. They're barely making sounds, and then after that, one or maybe two kids maybe have some private lessons or something, or maybe their parent was a music teacher themselves or a musician or whatever, and all of a sudden they're just coming in and they're being able to like play and play well, and then the other kids, or
they practiced.
Well, yes and no, though. I'm talking about that first couple of weeks where they can. It's hard to them practice if they can't make a sound, right?
I get what you're saying.
You know what I mean? No, and I agree. Practicing, well, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But that first moment where you see the couple of kids pull away, do you feel like part of the problem is us as teachers getting overly excited about those few students?
I don't know if that necessarily is part of. I mean, yes and no. Like I think it's natural for, especially in if you're teaching younger students, like the second that they do anything really good, like you should get excited for them, because especially if we're talking about making their first sound, or making a sound consistently. When that happens, like you want to encourage that, because you want them to like want to go home and keep doing it at home.
Right.
So you do want to encourage that. And then I always feel like I remember those lessons very clearly when like, one person starts to get it and then the next person like still can't get the sound out. I'm like, just don't give up. Just don't give up. Keep trying and try to like, come up with different ways to try it, having several different techniques, per instrument, knowing what, that's where the knowledge comes in. So that's where like, you mentioned before, like students at a college could go in and play at an elementary level, but which I agree, but I also, there's a difference between being able to do it and being able to teach it. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
So with that, actually, I'm so glad we're kind of going down this route, because I'll ask you a question. Have you ever heard of something called PBIS?
PBIS? I don't think so.
So that is a positive behavioral and interventions and supports. So the idea is, I mean, it's loosely based around positive reinforcement. So instead of having to constantly correct students for doing something wrong, we want to reinforce their positive behavior. So do you find yourself struggling sometimes too when a student is making a good sound and the other student is not even be able to make a sound yet? Are you thinking about ways you can say, good job to them about something somewhat unrelated? So like, yes, being rooted in reality. No, you didn't make the sound yet because we can all hear what Johnny's doing. Yes, but you're almost there. But I love how you connected the upper and the lower joint to the clarinet. That's perfect, right? Do you find yourself doing more of that?
All the time. That's definitely something that you always have to, no matter what, you always have to find something positive to say. So you can say, no, I really liked, I stole the word band face instead of using embouchure for younger kids.
I love it.
I teach them the word embouchure, but
Sure.
I often go back and forth and I make them know both, but like I'll
Yeah.
for the sake of ease, I sometimes just say band face. And I was like, your band face is perfect. Like you're doing this correctly. You're going to get it. You know, like I'll list off the things that they're doing correctly and say like, because you're doing this correctly, you know, the sound is going to come or whatever we're working on.
So 30,000 foot view again. You know, we talked about you having as a teacher who is lucky enough to have a wide experience with different age groups. You mentioned that students in elementary school are often more emotional. Do you feel that to be the case, or do you feel that high school students are just that much better at hiding it?
Yeah, there's a lot that could be going on with that. Yeah.
Right.
Because I think it also depends on a case by case basis.
Of course.
And I think as a teacher, it's kind of like the job to get to know each kid individually, to know if they're someone who will hide their frustration or express their frustration. I think maybe to get more to answer the question, like elementary, it's a little bit easier to see.
Right.
It's very easy to tell if they're trying to hide it, or if they're, obviously it's easy to tell if they are expressing their emotion. But I definitely would say, like, for high school, they've learned enough over the course of their life to be able to maybe, suppress saying what they think they need to say, or can just get you to the next thing just by saying another thing. If they don't want to work on something, they may say something, they can manipulate their own language a little bit better and their emotions a little bit better.
So you were off camera. We were talking a little bit about I think specifically on when you're teaching high school students privately. You were talking a little bit about their decisions on what to do after college after high school, and their approach is different than either you took and or maybe suggest you take, or different based on maybe the time that we're in. I mean, graduating high school going on almost 20 years ago for me. Elaborate on that. What's going on?
Well, yeah. So, I've encountered some students who've expressed interest in pursuing music in some way, shape, or form after high school, which is, great for me. That's awesome. I'm
right.
Definitely encouraging that and happy to be part of the process. And one of the things that I think that I've learned is, I've noticed that in those particular situations, when I talk to them about what else they're doing in their life, and I'm like, I notice it's a very much a burden is placed on them to take a lot of AP courses and a lot of extra work on that end. And I think to myself, back when I was in high school, now granted, I will preface this in saying I was not a very strong academic student. So I wasn't someone who, could probably take those AP classes. But I also think about, okay, this person maybe by their sophomore or junior year has decided, I want to go into music. But instead of, harnessing that decision and trying to expand upon it and try to, do more musical things in their life, they're, I think they're kind of brainwashed in a way to think that the more, AP classes or IB classes they can take, the more likely they are to get into a college where, that's all well and good, but if they can get into it academically, but if, what are you bringing to the table musically? I think about a lot of the, when you think about extracurriculars, when I was in high school, for example, I had a lot of music extracurriculars. There were things that I were doing, outside of school that were music related. And I've been finding that the pressure to in some situations, students are able to eat their lunch during their band class because they have so many AP classes, that's when they can eat their lunch. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if you want to go into music, then why don't you prioritize the music classes and give yourself the opportunity to, really, dive deep into that and really figure out, how can I either get myself involved in a group outside of school? How can I take another music class? How can I learn more about, prepare myself for college from the music standpoint instead of like taking as many, advanced courses that may not be necessarily relevant to the education as a future musician.
Sure. So I'd really like to unpack this. So I forgot, Hofstra wasn't your original first undergrad, right? Did you go somewhere else?
No, it was. I started as a finance major.
Right, that was it. Okay, perfect. Why did you perfect, right? Now, first of all, why did you go into finance originally? What was your thought process there? Because I'm sure there was a battle between, do I go into music education, or do I go into something else?
Yeah, I mean, my path to that was a pretty interesting one. I wasn't necessarily at the time where those decisions had to be made. I wasn't so dead set on becoming a teacher. I didn't know. I knew I loved playing the trumpet. I didn't know if I really would enjoy teaching it, so I didn't want to dedicate my life to that college. Now, granted, I didn't. Being a finance major was a major life mistake, but I guess it opened my eyes to what I should have done, because I couldn't pass calculus, and that was the
but
point.
You know what? How long did you spend in your finance degree? 1 year?
Yeah, 1 year.
So, hey, that's one. I don't know if that's a mistake. That's 1 year out of many, many years to learn.
Right, and I think I just thought to myself, I'll, obviously as a high school kid not knowing anything, I thought, I'll be a finance major, work on Wall Street, make a bunch of money, and then just play trumpet outside.
Right. And you don't need. I mean, let's be real. If you want to be a musical performer, you don't necessarily need to go to school. You need to study with a teacher and teachers. Right. You need to practice your butt off, and you need to be in as many ensembles as possible. But no, you don't necessarily. Yeah, theory helps.
And I think about now that I'm thinking about the three kind of main things I do outside of school that I like. The commitments that I make for my musical groups that I play in, and it's. There's definitely some that have more music teachers than other, but you don't necessarily need to be a music teacher in order to play music outside of when you're done with college and whatnot.
Right. So I'll give you a little background on my story when it comes to how I got accepted to college, because I think it's really important, because I can agree with you, but I think it's tricky. Because I think also right now, we're talking about right now, college is going through a huge transition of everything in every facet of college. So I went like this, right? I applied to a couple of other schools. They were all local. I had the decision in my mind that I was going to stay local. And I applied to maybe three schools and one fallback school, as we mentioned. My top school was Hofstra University, and that was the one I ended up going to. But that was the only one I did not get accepted into the actual university. My grades were not that good because I got onto the waiting list. Right, my grades were not that good because I focused on music. And I didn't do a lot of focusing too. So whatever little focusing I did, was music, right?
Right.
So, and I'll give myself some credit. I was really focused in theater. I was really focused in a lot of other things, that were productive. But so the band director called me up, and he called me up on the phone. He's like, "Kevin, hi. This is the band director at Hofstra University. See, you made the waiting list. So here's what I'd like to do is would you like to come to Hofstra?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." He's like, "All right. The dean owes me a favor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you removed from the waiting list. But you got to promise me that you're coming here. This is your first choice school." I said, "Absolutely. Oh my gosh." So interestingly enough, that exact like that exact scenario that you just painted, that, you know, students are, you know, investing too much in their other academic studies to become a rounded student, I could have used some of that because you know, now thankfully I did have the pull from the band director, and it was like that little peek into what like athletes get. You know, I was like, oh, right. But that's what that story was. So it is really interesting. Now, today's day and age, I think it's very different because, again, as I mentioned, I think college, I'm not 100% on it, and I think I would love to have some guests in the college world on this podcast to share some light, but I think college is going through a big transition. What it means to get a 4-year degree is going through a transition. So with that being said, again, it's like, I agree with you as well. It's like, what is it that you want to spend your life doing? Start maybe investing that. Now, with these students specifically that are taking, in your opinion, maybe too many APs and different academics and not focusing enough on music, are they 100% set on music? Or maybe one of them is?
They both are. They both are. They both are. And one is going and has been going and auditioning for colleges. Yeah.
Okay. For music ed? Okay. Do you happen to know that students, like, if what their kind of GPA is and snapshot of their?
I know they're in I know they're in like National Honor Society and stuff. So I know that.
Okay.
The academics isn't. Yeah, and I can definitely, just to like kind of come full circle based on our two experiences. Like, I know that, you know, I come at it from a very biased, like, not a strong academic thing. So, you know,
Same.
You know, I would have, you know, I like, you know, but then when you talk to students who want to go and do, you know, pursue something like music, and then they come and say, oh yeah, I didn't have time to practice, and that's consistent.
That's
it's like,
right.
okay, well
right.
then what's, you know, it's fine that happens every once in a while, but when it's consistent, I'm like, okay, well, you know, we have to, what is the priority here, you know?
And it's a hard decision because no one has the right answer. It's so dependent on this individual student, and it's ever changing. Especially when, you know, when we have artificial intelligence going to be able to write our college entrance essays for them way better than they will, you know, which is another conversation we'll have off camera. But that's seriously going to be, all these things are going to be changing very rapidly soon. So I think, again, what students, it's this really interesting dilemma that you have to realize that high school is such an important yet such a fractional point of your life where how you spend your time is only dependent, in my opinion, on the person you're going to be in the next chapter of your life. Because every chapter you get to become a different person. You get to focus on different things. You get to focus on who you want to become. But I think high school is only dependent on what you do in high school is only determining who you're going to be in the next chapter. So if you're really, really focused on music and you have just a bare minimum grade point average and SAT score to get you into that school, that's a decision, and it's not a bad thing or a good thing. I think it's just a decision that, you know, comprised of many other decisions that will take you to the next point, and you may have to shift. You may have to, you know, when I first got into college, I was solely focused on becoming a music educator. It was my primary focus. Playing the euphonium was an afterthought. It was nice and it was fine. And then all of a sudden, junior and senior rolled around. We got more students in the studio. They were really pretty decent players. And I just got the itch to be a performer, and it only grew. And like, that just shifts your intentions shift your, the person you become. So with that being said, what are some of the struggles that these specific students are dealing with? You mentioned practicing, but like when you say, okay, what's the priority? Like, and you decide, it's not up to me. I'm just your teacher. Like, I'm not your mommy or your daddy. I'm not you. Like, most importantly, I'm just asking you, what is your priority? What are some of the conflicts that come up besides what they think is the time commitment, which, yes, they're busy, but what are some of the things that internally they're struggling with, like why they're not practicing as much as they want to be ultimately?
Well, there's another part of this too that, is also can come from what their family is presenting. For example, my family just wasn't necessarily too on top of me for my academics. So I didn't have the stress of like parents breathing down my neck of trying to get A's. Right. I'm very fortunate for that, and obviously, everyone comes from a different background and everyone comes from a different experience. So that also has to be taken into effect when we have these conversations. But I think it's also like and I don't know if this is like a COVID related thing where like kids the students I've interacted that are like, when they talk to me about like maybe going for music school, they just like, it seems like the research, like they haven't done their research and really like figured out like why they want to make these decisions, or like why are we actually going to go into this field? Like what about like why do you want to be a music teacher? I feel like, or why do you want to go into a different field of music? And like, I have a student who wants to go into another field of music, producing, but I don't really know how they got, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I don't know how they got to that conclusion having zero experience doing it. Now in my role, I've been able to expose them to producers that I know that over the course of time, just like, hey, now, and they were able to bring them on to like a Zoom and have a conversation about it. But like, how are we coming to these conclusions that we want to go down this path? And then what are you doing to better yourself and put yourself in a better position? I feel like there's a lot of like lack of clarity in those conversations.
Yeah. Like the decision making, or the lack of clarity of how we're coming to these choices in front of us and the decision we make. Do you think a lot of it has to do with parental influence, or other school, like adult influence?
I would think it's maybe more on the adult side. I'm thinking maybe the school side, where it's like, because they're being pulled in so many different directions, they think, they've made their decision to maybe, I want to pursue this, but then like they don't have the time and space and opportunity to really like explore it and really go down like, okay, why am I going to apply to certain schools? Besides the fact that they're like, maybe bigger names, or, what am I looking to get out of a college experience? I feel like maybe because they have so many other things to do that like they can't find the time to really center in and focus on that.
That's something you also mentioned, like right before we started recording, is that you feel like students are just way too overscheduled. Do you see that at all grade levels?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, There's been even, in every grade level I taught, I will come, when I ask the question in like a lesson, like, hey, how did practicing go this week? I couldn't practice. I had this practice this day, this practice this day. I had this tutor. I had, karate. I had this thing. I had that thing. And granted, like, I remember myself growing up playing sports.
Right.
Like, I played sports. Granted, I wasn't like a very serious athlete. I took it seriously, but like, I wasn't like going to be making a profession out of playing sports. Right. But like, I still found the time to still do all my other stuff. I guess it's a matter of like prioritizing things, and also like, they don't, especially the younger the student, the less control really they have over their schedule. And I guess, if something like music, for example, becomes an interest of theirs, then conversations with parents like, hey, they're really interested in music. How about they do this like cool thing that like really like furthers their interest, instead of this other thing that's just like a babysitting thing, trying to find those opportunities. But I've definitely over my career have had conversations with students at all grade levels that have been like, yeah, I had like not just like something going on every day, but like an overwhelming, like, I've talked to high school students who like been in like 10 different clubs and are like,
right.
they're overdoing, like trying to be involved. They're overdoing it, and like then they find themselves having to cancel on other things because they're double booked because this had a meeting here, but then this thing had an event this day, and then because of that, then a chain reaction. So I definitely have found that in all levels for sure.
And
it's hard to find that balance too. You want to be involved, but it's hard. You're learning how to do it. I feel like I'm 33 years old, and I think I finally, after I've been teaching for 7 years, I'm finally in the teaching position where I want to stay at for the next 30 years, and I finally have kind of settled into the types of performing that I want to do. And I've been a professional for a long time, so it's it's easier said than done for sure.
And I think a perfect kind of thing to put on top of this is that even if they are overscheduled, but at the point where they're still able to pull off everything, they're still able to practice, the necessary amount of time, something crazy, but just, put their, say whatever, 4 days a week in, half an hour a day, which would, in the reality, if students actually did that, it would be like light years different, right? But, even if they're able to pull off all of that, there's something that has to be said for the stress of everything. I remember when I was in high school, if I had, and I wasn't in too much, but when it was showtime, like it was when we were in theater, there was, say, a month before, the show date, we started having rehearsals pretty much every night of the week. So even before then, I'd have a few rehearsals here and there, and I happened to get actually, if not the supporting lead, the lead in these shows quite some bit. So I had a ton of work to do. There was that. There was band. There was marching band. There was jazz band. There was orchestra. There was, there was one or two clubs I was in. There was quite a bit, and even though I was able to pull it off, I remember being so stressed certain times, and especially at the expense of my grades. I mean, there was one of the regions, which, I mean, if you're not from New York, you may not realize that there's, certain state exams, whatever. And this was not that I couldn't get a regent's diploma. It was the next level. So I was still okay, but I failed the one test. And I mean, there was twofold. One, I didn't study enough. And two, math was hard for me. It just was tricky. And I remember I retook it. I took a study course and everything. And I had a private tutor or whatever, and I failed again. And I just was so stressed and so upset. And I look back on that now, almost 20 years later, I'm like, there was no need to be. And that might have been from just an overwhelming amount of things on my mind. Like I said, even though I was able to pull off all these different activities and be, like I said, pull them off, I feel like just having them all cluttered here, not having our brains even closely developed yet, not knowing how to calendar properly, not knowing how to set routines throughout your day, that's just a lot. It's a lot of stuff. There is no white space for kids to be kids to figure out. And any white space you have, I had a lot of white space, it happened. It was always, on weekend nights, late at night, and that's, it's a really interesting conversation. Do you feel like a lot of your education is also to the parents and saying yeah, listen, this is what has to happen. However you guys need to do that. I'm not telling you what to do, because I remember when I was private teaching, I taught, some high school students. I feel like more often I taught younger students. And I just, I would just have these conversations, because they would come up to me oh, there's just no time to practice. I'm like, okay. That I don't know what to say to that, but in order to do X, you need to do Y or whatever.
Yeah. I feel like educating parents from whatever role, the teacher or like you were saying, private teacher, that's another part of the job. It's part of what you have to do. If some private some lesson situations, the kid doesn't practice, and that's like just a time for them to hang out and just practice their band music. Maybe they have an assignment, and then it's more of like you can be totally well and good to just go in there, take the money, and just get out and just
as long as you communicate with I was always very clear about communicating with the parent. Just understand.
And I have that. I have a situation like that where I have a student parent, that doesn't really practice or really do much, but really likes lessons and hanging out for that 45 minutes.
Sure.
And, I'm right now in a position where I'm not teaching as many lessons right now because I've got a lot of other things going on. So it's part of my schedule to be there. And hey, I'll take your money if you want to just give it to me. I'm just hanging out. We're not really doing much. We're playing a lot.
We'll play music. Right. That's fine.
And this is your practice session. You didn't practice all week. This is now your practice session.
Exactly right. And that's unfortunately what people a lot of parents don't realize is that there is, just like any other subject, it's easier to see in music because that is, but again, what most parents don't understand is that the lesson is like, in a way, the practice exam. In a practice exam, you're not going to be able to use your textbooks. In a practice exam, you're not going to be able to use a calculator if that's, the what needs to be done. You're not going to be able to use all these things and have unlimited time to work on the problem. It's a practice exam. And that's kind of like what a lesson is. It's a practice performance with your teacher. You're going to come in prepared to perform. Totally a concept that most, especially non-artistic parents, don't understand. It's not their fault. It's just something that. But again, it's the same thing with how we look at how we compare to the rest of their education. When they go to school, we're thinking that school is going to teach them, which yes, of course it will. And the amount of time that students are in school, there's going to be teaching that's going to be going on. But the studying after school, the homework after school, or more importantly, the extra studying that student needs to do because they know they need to reread that, subject. Reread, right? If you told me that when I was in high school, I'd be like, that's funny. Yeah. But it's truthful, right? That is the practicing of your instrument. The class, the time, the 40-minute periods, in a way, that's like a practice performance. Granted, again, we're going to be doing some more teaching, but I think that's just a good mindset for everybody to try and adopt, because I think that will aid more students to begin to realize, like, I do need to reread that chapter. I just, and having that becomes into, well, I'm overscheduled because I needed the time to do that. And there we go, so.
Right.
Any final thoughts on this stuff? I think this was such a great conversation with you, man. I enjoyed doing this with you. I think this is really enlightening on how the level of stress students are facing today does not have to be the case. Because there's so many other things that they need to be stressed about. High school in general is a stressful 4 years. Any final words?
I mean, it's really like the hindsight is such. I feel like hindsight has really like helped me when I talk to students about this stuff. Because then I feel like, I like to be very like kind of blunt with my students and honest about stuff. I don't like to just, especially for those who like are expressing an interest that maybe want to have a future in it, I always just try to say, like, put yourself in a position to, like, focus on the things that you're passionate about. And if it's not serving that, then figure out if it's what I know I've used, like, AT classes as my example a lot. But, like, if that's not serving you, or any other thing like that's not serving you and your interests, like, think about how you want to prioritize those things moving forward. And I know, we can go on a whole long conversation about prioritizing things, routines. Yeah, and I wish I had some more solid routines, like, writing things down when I was younger. But I often just try to say, like, if it's not serving what you want out of, your experience, and like, then you got to like take a step back and figure out how you can, reorganize, the things that you have to do on a weekly basis.
With that being said, my friend, what a great conversation. Can I ask you a question? You may not have an answer to this, but if somebody wants to contact you, if someone wants to maybe go to a gig of yours playing music, or see something or learn a little bit more about the great Dan Wendelken, where would you guide them somewhere, say on the internet, or are you the man behind the curtain in Wizard of Oz?
I would say the thing that I do that is in most like public facing kind of thing is I play in the Brooklyn Wind Symphony, and that's an organization that I've been a part of for 7 or 8 years. Incredible organization that has several different bands within their community, all volunteer. And this one particular group just does a lot of really high level music by composers that are commonly underrepresented in, I can't say that word, underrepresented in our, in the band world. So we do performances, we have, I think our modern band, so all modern composers coming up. I think we have a 15-year anniversary performance in the end of May, and then playing Carnegie Hall June 9th, I think, with the Atlanta Youth Wind Symphony. So that I would say in terms of the education part of this would be the thing I would like to advertise. The wedding band situation is
you got to get married. You got to get married to see Dan play in the wedding band. Right.
And call me up.
Right. Well, Dan, thanks again, buddy. It was great talking to you.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
So thanks so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mr. Dan Wendelken. If you're interested and you are local in the New York area in learning a little bit more about his performing with the Brooklyn Wind Symphony, you should check that out. I know a few of the musicians there. They're really extremely high caliber, and it's an extremely high caliber group, and it's awesome music. So check that out. And if you like today's episode, then definitely like the video, hit subscribe, and leave a comment and let me know kind of what you thought was interesting. And of course, if you want me to have Mr. Dan the Pan Wendelken back on the show. So thanks so much, and I will see you next week on the Upgrade My Classroom podcast.